For this tutorial, I will do a prototype of the Amazing Race. So basically, I'll just set it up very quickly and make the game work. So you have an understanding of how the game is supposed to work and how to set it up. Okay. All right. To start with, I already downloaded or imported the standard assets. Okay, so you can get that from the asset store, or you can just download it from the link provided in the assignment. All right, you'll also need some scripts that for the Amazing Race. You'll also need some 3 scripts that is provided by the book, and we'll have to import those in order to be able to use those scripts. We're going to be using C# type scripts. And so, okay, so let's start with first importing the scripts. So I'll create a folder first, and I'll name it scripts so I can keep all my scripts in there. And I'll double click it. So there's where we're going to import the scripts. So I'll go to the folder where I have the scripts. These are the 3 scripts you'll need: finish zones.cs, game manager.cs, and player respawn.cs. All right, so you can just open up the folder where the scripts are and just click and drag into the script folder. And now we have the scripts in there. All right, so now that we've set now that we have that in there, I'm going to go ahead and create a quick terrain. So 3D objects, terrain. I'm going to modify it, not make it so large. So I'm going down to the terrain width and terrain length, changing that from 1000 to 100 on both of these, and terrain height to 60. Okay. And then, so now my terrain should be smaller to work with. Now, before I do that, I know that I'm going to have to lower the terrain. And so in order to do that, I need to make some changes here. So I'm going to go to my paintbrush right here in my part of my components. And if you'll notice, when I click on raise or lower terrain, I can raise it. But if I try to lower a certain section of it, holding down the shift key, notice that I can't do that. So I'm going to go to set height, and I'm going to change the height to 30 because we set it at 60, so we're just saying that we're going to set it at 30 to be able to work with that. So I'm click on flatten all. Notice this will get flattened out. So that's why it's important to set the height first before, so if you know you're going to lower your terrain. Okay, so I will raise my terrain at one end, and then I'll put the camera on the other end. So just raise that here. All right, so this is part of our game. Again, this is just a prototype, and this is going to be the hazard. So I'm going to lower this right here, holding on the shift. All right, so theoretically the player would fall in there and would be respawn back. So by the way, yeah, so the idea of the game is that you're going to race from one end of your game to the other end of your game, right? And there's going to be a bunch of hazards all throughout your game that you have to avoid falling into or getting destroyed or whatever. But in this case, just basically falling into these hazards. So again, yours is going to be more elaborate and so on. But is just a mock-up here. So I'm just quickly setting it up, and we'll set it up so that the player starts at this end, will walk into here, and then it'll be respawn back to the starting point. Okay. So anyway, obviously we can avoid that, but if you make it with enough hazards and so on, you won't be able to avoid those hazards. You have to be very careful and so on to get to the finish point, which will be about here. Okay. All right. So let's start with creating the hazard. Actually, let's start by adding. We can add our characters. So I'm coming down to the standard assets. You go to characters, and want to go to first person characters, prefabs, and there's the FPS controller, and I'm just going to place it right at this corner. So notice the height on it is at 30, and that's going to be important to note because we're going to be placing other empty objects, and we just want to make sure that the height is at 30. So again, you'll notice in terms of the FPS controller, there's the embedded, the first-person character, and we can see the field of view is facing out, into space. So we need to just flip it around. All right, so first I'm going to select the FPS controller, not the first-person character, which, by the way, I'll change this to player. So I'm changing the FPS controller name to player, not the first-person character. I'm just going to select that. And then I'll rotate it. Here in my, actually, yeah, I could just rotate it here. Or click on my rotation tool and rotate it there too. All right. So again, if I come back over here, we can see the mountain in the distance and the hazard. Okay, so we'll do a quick little test. So I'm going to, here's my game view, and I'm clicking on maximize and play. So that takes up the full screen. So when I test it out, so I'm going to go Command P or Control P to play, and I'm in my play mode. I can look around and so on, and then I'll move through that. Here's my hazard, so I fall in, jump out, and here's would be where the finish line would be. Okay. So what we need to do, obviously we need to add more things in here in order to make this into a game. By the way, if you notice that when I went into the play mode, the audio footsteps were not playing. Also here, I just noticed that it says there are 2 audio listeners in the scene. So that comes from the main camera, which has an audio listener, and actually the first-person character, which is a camera, and there's an audio listener there. So we don't need the main camera. So if you'll notice, it's out there in space somewhere. We don't need that. I'm just going to delete it. All right, so, and this should still have this clicked in audio listener. So now when I go to in the play mode again, notice you can hear the footsteps. Okay. All right, get out of the play mode there. Okay, so we have our terrain pretty much set up the way we want to, for the mock-up, right? And our player. All right, so now what we need is a hazard detector. So I'm going to create a plane, and we're going to use that as our hazard detector. And so we can see it right here. Let's zoom in. It's actually below, somewhere below down there, right? And if you'll notice, it says -6 here. On the y-axis, I'm going to change that to 30. Brings it up. Now we can see it there. move it into place. So I'm going to use this. Use my move tool, and I'll just move it over here, right over it. Maybe lower it a little bit. I'm going to resize it. Okay, I'm going to lower it some more. Using, by the way, I'm using shortcut keys, the W and the E. W is my move tool, and rotation tool is the E key if I need to rotate it. And to expand it, I use the R key. Okay. All right. So going back to the W, lower it a little bit more. So this is going to be the hazard detector. In the game, you will have a water over this hazard detector, so it won't be noticed. So then when the player walks through the water, it actually, the water is not going to detect that the player is there, but this will detect. This plane will detect that the player has entered that hazard. Okay. So we'll need to modify some things on that, but for now we'll just leave it as is. Next, we'll create the spawn point. So we're going to use create an empty object, and it gets placed randomly there. So, oops, should click there. So I'm going to rename that to spawn point. Okay. And as we can see, it's at below there somewhere. By the way, you can also just quickly, when you're working on a game and you're not sure where this empty object is because there's nothing onto it, you can always select the object, right mouse click, and add a 3D object which you can delete later. So notice when I did that, it becomes a child of the spawn empty object, right? So now I can see that object that is, way down there. So when I pull it up, I don't have to worry too much. At least placing it, I can see that it's going to be placed over my terrain, and it's somewhat in the area where I want it to be. So, but knowing that I need it to be at about 30, I'm just going to actually just type in 30 there. And we know that we want this to be the starting, or we want it to spawn back. So when the player walks to, or it hits a hazard area, it gets spawned back to the beginning. And if we look at the numbers here, 89, X, so about 90 and 91, and we look at the spawn point is about 91, 94, so about the same. In the book, it will actually tell you exactly where the coordinates should be. All right, but this is, again, just a quick estimation of where the beginning is. So notice right here, it's a little back. So we can just move this back a little bit. There's the, oops. There's the cube. So now we know that the spawn point is in front of where the player starts, which is fine for now. Let's go ahead. So we have that. So if you notice, when I go into play mode, there's the cube right there, which is in front of it, which is actually the spawn point. Okay, we'll get rid of that cube later on. All right, so we've added the cube of the spawn point, the plane, which is the hazard, and we need to now add the finish zone. So that finish zone, again, we will create an empty object, and let's make sure it's not a child of that. Okay, So there's where my empty object, well, so we'll name that to finish zone. And we'll add to that a light component, and we'll change the color on it just so we can see it a lot better. We'll change the intensity. You notice it's at 26, so when I raise it, it's about 30 or so. There it is. You can see it there. So we want this further back, so we'll assume that this will be our finish right about here. So I'm going to increase the intensity. We can see it really well. All right. So that's one of the things for the finish that one of the components you're going to be adding a light. And to add, as you saw, I clicked on Add Component. So another component I'm going to add is, by the way, I just typed in light to be able to add the light, is a Capsule Collider. So I'm going to start typing Capsule Collider, and there it is. So it's a collider. This will detect when something has collided with it. Okay, so that's important to make sure that if an object does not have a collider, and if you wanted to be able to detect, being shot or colliding with something or whatever type of thing, then you need a collider. And there's various type of colliders you can add. So in this case, we've added the Capsule Collider, and I'm going to change the radius. Let's zoom in on that a little bit so you can see the collider. Notice right there how it's getting smaller or bigger as I slide back and forth. So you're going to make it about the size of the light so that, again, when the player collides with it, it will detect it. All right. So we've added those things. Now, before we go on, we need to add another empty object, which is going to be our game manager. And this doesn't matter where it is positioned. Okay. So that's it could be it could be floating out in space anywhere. It doesn't matter. But the finish zone and the spawn point, hazard detector, all those obviously matter where they're placed. So the game manager, as the word indicates here, it's kind of self-explanatory. It's going to manage the whole game. All right, there's script that we need to add to all these different things. So let's go ahead and start. Let's go back to our script folder, and here we have the finish zone script, the game manager script, and the player respawn script. All right, so to start with, let's see here. Well, let's start with the hazard script. So we will add the player respawn to the hazard detector. So I'm going to click and drag. Notice in order to place it on there, I'm going to click and drag to that object. And then notice over here, it is added. And we'll come back to this. We need to fill in this placeholder. So then we're going to go to spawn point. We don't need to add a script to that. The finish zone, yes, we do need to add a finish zone to that. So we can, as you saw, I can just click and drag there, or I can click and drag over here, and now it's added. So I click and drag into the inspector, making sure the finish zone is selected, and now the finish zone script has been added to that. Then we're going to go to our game manager, and then we're going to click and drag the game manager script, which has that little gear icon, and I'm going to click and drag it onto the game manager. So it has been added to the game manager, and there are some placeholders here, which, by the way, when you select each of these script by itself in the inspector, you get a preview of the script. And later on, we'll work we'll learn how to work with these scripts. So right now these scripts have been given to us so we can make a game rapidly and work with it and see how it works and so on. All right. So again, as you can see, so you have a little preview of the script itself just by clicking on these particular scripts. All right, so now let's go back to our hierarchy and make some modifications to our different game objects. So to start with, let's go back to the hazard detector. And let me move that over there. Zoom out. So there is our hazard detector. So for that, make sure you've selected it. And then I'm going to scroll down into the player respawn script. And you'll notice that we have a placeholder here that was created by the player respawn script. Notice that the placeholder name is Game Manager, so it is expecting that we drop the Game Manager object onto this placeholder. So you can do it in a couple of different ways. One is to click on this icon, circle icon, and usually you'll get this, and you'll get a dialog box. You'll be able to select the object, but as you can see, we're not able to select anything there. So what we're going to do, again, making sure we have the hazard detector selected so we can see the player respawn script. I'm going to click and drag it onto here like that. So that's one way to get a game object onto a placeholder. So just basically clicking and dragging it onto the placeholder. Okay, so that's one of the important things we need to do. The other is that in the collider, so this has a mesh collider. If you remember in the finish zone, we added a collider. This plane already came with a collider. So what we need to set this collider up to detect when something collides with it. So we're going to click on convex and is trigger. So it's going to be a trigger that will trigger the script to do something. Right? In this case, it will be to respawn the player back to the starting point, or in this case, back to the spawn point. All right, so that is pretty much set up. And now we will go to, well, yeah, the spawn point doesn't need a script, so we'll go to the finish zone. If you notice, we'll scroll down, and this is empty, so we need to add that, the game manager, to the finish zone script also. So I'm going to click and drag it. All right, so now we're going to go to the game manager, and we'll notice that on there we have two placeholders, the spawn point and player. So in this one, we should be able to click on the little circle there, and you'll notice that we do have our assets, different objects in there. So we're looking for the spawn point, so that's on there. And now we're looking for the player. Remember, we renamed it. It was the FPS controller. So if you don't rename it, remember that's going to be the FPS controller. All right, so now we have it. We have everything populated. Now let's go back to our finish zone. Actually, I forgot something in our finish zone. We're going to do the same thing we did with the hazard detector. We need to make sure in the collider, remember we added the Capsule Collider, that it is a trigger. Okay, so when something bumps into it or gets within its Capsule Collider zone, it detects, it triggers the script to do something. In this case, would be to finish the game, and there'll be other things that that will happen with, as you will see. Let me see if there's anything else here. Finish zone, hazard. Now, depending on what version of Unity you have, there may be some issue when you try to play the game. So let's go ahead and try it. I'm going to do Command P or Control P. I'm going to get into my play mode. We'll have to fix that. Notice it's facing the other way, and that's because of the spawn point. But we'll forget that for now. All right, so what's supposed to happen is as soon as I land here, I'm supposed to go back to the spawn point. It doesn't happen. I'm going to just go to the finish. That does work, but when I hit enter, as it says click or place enter to play again, you'll notice that it's supposed to send me back to the spawn point to start all over again, but I'm still at the finish point. Okay, there's the spawn point. You see the cube over there. All right, so I'm gonna finish the let's end the play mode there. All right, so this is what you need to fix, and so we need to go into our project setting, and so you're going to go to Edit, down to Project Setting, and what happened was that with newer versions, the physics engine got changed, and so this was set up with an older physics engine, 2018, right? And this version I'm using is 2019.4. There's already 2020 alpha and beta version out there. So, but I'm just gonna stay with this version right for now. Anyway, so we need to click on Physics, Project Settings, Edit Project Settings, and then Auto Sync Transform. Okay. All right. So let's try that again. Hit Enter. Fix that in a second. Notice when I went into the hazard, I spawned back to the beginning, right? Okay, so I'm just going to obviously avoid them. I'm holding on the Shift key to make myself go faster. All right, I hit the finish point, hit Enter again, and notice I spawned back towards the beginning. So basically, that's how the game is supposed to be played. And if you notice, when we go into the play mode, that we have these added things on here, buttons. We have a timer. As you can see, there's a timer playing through it. So basically, this game, it's basically the rules are to get through the hazards, and so you don't respawn somewhere else, and the goal is to get to the finish point, right? All right. Okay, so now, as I said before, when we go into the play mode, and then I hit Enter, I'm looking the other way. And that has to do with our spawn point, okay? So, now I kept the cube so that I can use that more as a reference for now. So when I'm rotating my spawn point, so I want to make this cube a little long, so I kind of use it like a pointer almost, okay? Remember, it's still a child of that, so I'm going to go back to the spawn point to rotate the spawn point, not the cube. And so I'm going to go in my y-axis. So right now, I can think of maybe that this is pointing this way. Every time we land, it's pointing out towards this way, right? With the player when the player lands. So I'm going to rotate it, and again, assuming that this is the front of it. And remember, I'm selecting the spawn point and not the cube itself. But it'll look like I'm rotating the cube. And I'm going to rotate from here to there so that this is pointing that way. Let's see if that works. Yep, so there you go. It's pointing towards that way. Now I can go ahead and get rid of that cube. All right, so just select the cube, press delete, And that's it. So again, go into the play mode, press enter, and there we go. And there you have it.